As a leader, you're always looking for ways to drive growth. Sometimes because the business is strong and opportunity is showing up, sometimes because pressure is building and standing still isn't an option. Either way, growth doesn't start as a tactic. It starts as a strategy you believe will move the business forward. And from your seat, it makes sense. It fits the moment. It should work for the business and for the people involved. And that belief you have is usually where the risk begins. Not because you're wrong, but because it stops getting tested. I was a top-performing wealth advisor, leader, and executive in the wealth management industry for 23 consecutive years, building and running multi-billion-dollar businesses. So what are you going to learn today? 1, why your personal conviction is enough to start a strategy, but not enough to justify rolling it out. 2, how early agreement can actually hide whether the benefit actually exists for others. 3, what to watch for when support looks present but isn't built to last. And 4, how to know whether a strategy is strong enough to be rolled out or should just stay unlaunched. Once your belief is there, the decision doesn't feel tentative. And from your seat, this isn't speculation. You've seen enough cycles to know when waiting creates its own risk. And you understand what hesitation costs, not hypothetically, but in real outcomes. So your decision doesn't come with internal debate. It comes with resolve. You're confident this strategy will move the business forward. Confident that it will create process others can build around. And this isn't about proving anything. It's about committing to a direction you believe is right. And once that conviction is set, you move. So you roll it out carefully. You explain the direction. You frame it why it matters now. And you walk your people through what changes and what doesn't. Your teams and your partners, they lean in. No one pushes back on you. And that alignment, that's the good kind. The kind that feels earned. People adjust how they talk about their work. Meetings shift slightly. Attention moves where you expected it to. And early on, to you, it works. Not dramatically, but cleanly. And that momentum shows up without any resistance. And that progress, it feels natural. And at this stage, nothing is being forced. And to you, nothing feels fragile. And this is usually where you'll stop evaluating without realizing they've stopped. And results, they start showing up. Not explosive results, but real ones. Movement where there had been friction. Conversations opening that weren't happening before. And progress that feels cleaner than it did a few months ago. And enough to say to yourself, this is working. But from the outside, it looks like validation. But from the inside, it starts feeling like relief. Because the direction didn't just sound right. It started behaving like it was right. And that's when the shift you weren't watching for begins. Because you stop asking where the belief is deep enough, whether effort is coming from conviction or courtesy. And because something is finally moving, and I don't mean breakthrough movement, but confirmation movement, enough to justify your decision, enough to continue to move on. And for a while, the strategy you did really does carry itself. But then gradually, the tone shifts. Not visibly, not all at once, but you start to feel it. You start repeating to everyone the why, just a little bit more. You notice follow-through takes longer than it used to. And some of the priorities that you had drift back to where they were before. No one's resisting, and no one challenges the strategy. But fewer people move without being asked. Teams are still supporting, they're just waiting more. Your partners are still aligned, but their attention isn't reorganizing around this anymore. And what quietly changes is who's carrying the strategy. It's not the system, it's not the belief, it's you. And at this point, you'll usually compensate. You'll clarify more, you'll reinforce expectations, you'll stay closer to the execution. And you don't call it pressure, you call it leadership. And things continue to keep moving, but now they're moving because of your presence, because of reminders, because of your involvement. And this is where the strategy starts costing more than it should. Not financially, relationally, cognitively, politically. You're spending attention to keep something alive that was supposed to carry itself. And eventually it reaches a plateau. Nothing fails, nothing collapses, but the strategy no longer pulls decisions forward on its own. It competes with everything else instead of organizing around itself. And that's when the thought shows up. Is this still the right direction? Do we refine it, or do we quietly move on? And this is one of the most expensive moments, and most leaders don't realize it. Because what you're really evaluating isn't your idea. You're evaluating whether the belief was ever built deeply enough to last. So this is where your strategy actually gets tested. Because every strategy starts with belief, but not the kind most leaders think. From your seat, the benefit was clear. It made sense for the business. It fit the moment you were in, and it aligned where you believe things needed to go next. And your conviction was real, and it's usually what gets the strategy launched. But that's not the test. The test is whether the people who had to carry this actually experience benefits themselves. Not conceptually, not eventually, and not once it works. Personally, the breakdown doesn't show up as resistance. It shows up in whether the benefit is personal enough to sustain support. And early on, your conviction and attention carry the strategy. And as novelty fades, a quieter question surfaces. Does this direction put me in a meaningfully better position over time? Or does it simply ask for me to operate differently? And that distinction matters, because for your team, that question shows up in subtle ways, whether it created optionality or just added responsibility. And even for your partners, it's even clearer. They don't operate inside your strategy. They operate inside their own businesses. So every meeting, every adjustment, every follow-up this required had to compete with outcomes they were already responsible for producing. And if their participation didn't clearly strengthen their position, their belief never fully set. And when benefit isn't felt in personal outcomes, support doesn't disappear. It becomes conditional. People will help you early, they'll stay cooperative, but their willingness to invest time, attention, and resources thins once this has to compete with everything else they're responsible for. And that's usually that first signal you'll miss, because nothing looks broken when it happens. Then I look at who had to carry this before it could ever carry itself. Because every strategy you do depends on someone holding it up early, before belief is complete, before momentum is real, and before results reinforce anything. The question isn't whether people were willing. It's whether I was honest about who I was relying on first. For the teams, this means being clear about whether they could actually carry this without me, or whether I was committing to develop them into that capability over time. Not eventually, but in real conditions. And if the strategy required judgment they didn't have, then it wasn't self-carrying. It was leader-carried, whether I acknowledged that or not. And that matters, because leader-carried strategies consume attention long after launch. And for the partners, the test is different and often ignored. They don't carry strategy by believing in it. They carry it by allocating time and resources away from their own priorities. So the real question is simple. How much of their calendar, focus, and capacity does this strategy require, and for how long? Not once, not a kickoff, but sustained. And if I wasn't explicit about that trade-off, if I assumed partners would make room indefinitely, then carry was never secured. It was borrowed. And finally, I even look at leadership attention. Early on, support is visible, priority is clear, but leadership capacity is finite. Every strategy competes with the next one, the next problem, the next escalation. So the question is whether support showed up at launch. It's whether the strategy could survive once leadership attention inevitably moved elsewhere. And if it couldn't, then carry was conditional. And conditional carry is indistinguishable from no carry at all. And this is the last part where most leaders misread what's happening. They launch believing it will click. The assumption is that once it's in motion, belief will deepen, that momentum will build, and that the pieces will settle into place as people adjust. So when it doesn't move the way they expect, they don't stop. They tweak, they refine, they shift emphasis. Not because they're uncertain, but because they're trying to make real something they believe should already be true. But what it's actually doing is signaling that the direction isn't settled yet. So people don't resist, they don't disengage, they just wait. And they'll hold back just enough to protect themselves until they see whether this version is the one that lasts. And that's why durability matters. Not because leaders shouldn't adjust, but because every adjustment quietly teaches people how seriously to take the next one. Because when your strategy only works to refinement and reselling, it isn't durable. It's running on hope. And that hope creates stop and start behavior without anyone ever deciding to stop. When the next strategy launches with less belief than the last one. So this is not about avoiding change. It's not about being perfect. It's about understanding whether the strategy was built to carry belief or whether the belief was borrowed early and paid back later with effort. Because in a world full of information, people don't choose authority because it sounds right. They choose authority that protects them from being wrong at the most expensive moments. And this right here is one of them. Every week, I break down the real strategy behind top performance for wealth advisors and leaders ready to operate at the level they're built for. This is EliteVate. We cut through the fluff, no hype, no theory, just strategy, psychology, and execution. If it hits home, subscribe. You're not just watching and learning. You will become the model others follow.